Tune into Blak Cyber, the number one podcast to jumpstart, sustain, and catapult African Americans' career in a cybersecurity. Blak Cyber, securing our place in the industry.
What's up, everybody? This is the Blak Cyber podcast, and I'm your host, George McPherson. Today, we have with us, this guy's a certified CHFI. He holds a master's degree in cybersecurity. He's the Cyber Master Instructor. He's the host of the Cyber Life podcast. He's also the 2019 SC Media Reboot Leadership Award for Outstanding Educator. And he has probably trained over 5 million cybersecurity students around the world. Today's guest is none other than Ken Underhill. Welcome, Ken.
Thanks, George. First, thanks for having me on the podcast, man. Really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I know I'm in Charlotte and you're in Houston, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, so I know I kind of got you up early this morning, but definitely.
Who sleeps, George? Come on, we're in cybersecurity, man. Nobody sleeps.
Hey, we never stop the hustle, but I think with everything going on right now, it might be taking a toll, but we keep going, right?
That's right, man. I think with everything going on, it's definitely a little more job security for everybody.
Yes, absolutely.
Like the criminal attackers certainly haven't taken any breaks.
No, I think they're working overtime at this point.
Yeah, they are, man.
Ken, let's get into. I want to talk to you about the blueprint of a successfully studying for security certifications.
Okay.
And I want to go ahead.
I was going to say, go ahead, man. Go ahead.
What do you think the best tactic is for studying for? What advice do you have to new students coming in and they want to, kind of get their foot in the door and they're starting to look at IT security certifications and maybe picking it and what's a good kind of study plan to kind of get started?
Sure. So I say as far as picking them, George, I normally tell people look at the places you want to work and see what certs they want, right? Because I actually get a lot of people that want to break into the InfoSec industry and they all want to get the CEH certification or they want to get OSCP or something like that. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you're entry level, it's going to be a red flag for most hiring managers. They're going to say, well, why did you get this more advanced certification and not like Security Plus, right? Or why didn't you go get experience before you got this certification? So that's one of the things I see people doing a lot. So just look at the employers that you want to work at and see what they're asking for. And that should really guide which certifications you're choosing, at least initially, right? As far as how do you study or what's the best way to study? There's several components to that. The number one component, in my opinion, being that you need to plan things out and you need to plan it realistically. Like you shouldn't say, okay, well, Saturday night, I'm going to do all my study. And that's not realistic for most people, right? Maybe that's the only time you have. But what I found is best is I do a little bit each day or every couple of days when I'm studying for a cert. And that allows me to actually have a life and do other things, which is somewhat critical. And especially if you have a spouse, they enjoy that. So
yes, definitely.
So just planning it out to kind of map to your life is one of the best things. Now, with that being said, you also need to look at the objectives for that cert. So some certifications will almost make you be like a jack of all trades. So like the CEH, for example, like they've got a ton of learning objectives, but when you take the actual exam, it's like 4 things that you really have to know, right? And sometimes the questions repeat, but I didn't say that. So, but you just need to understand that the learning objectives that are stated in an exam are pretty broad for the most part across many certifications, right? And so look at those as like, okay, I need to kind of know these things at a high level and then try to analyze what are the most important things in this search, right? So somebody that gets this certification and has passed it successfully, what are the actual things they need to know, right? So as an example with the CEH, it's not a hands-on exam. They do have a practical, but the one I took is just the test. And so with that, when I was studying for it, I looked at it and I said, okay, well, what does a pen tester actually need to know that they're covering in this particular cert exam, right? And really, it's just things like the methodology, understanding the different tools a little more in depth, especially things like Nmap, and the rest of it's kind of common sense, or that you could learn a bit about malware and stuff and understand that. So I focus most of my studies on web attacks and Nmap, right? And when I went
Gotcha.
into the exam, again, I can't tell you what's on the exam, but when I took the exam, those were some of the kind of the major things that I had seen on the exam, aside from things like malware, which I already knew that, and phishing attacks and et cetera. So when you're studying for an exam, first thing I would do, look at the learning objectives, try to figure out like, okay, which ones are probably the most important here. And I also would suggest talking to people that have passed that exam. Say, hey, when you took it, I know you can't tell me what's on it, but of these learning objectives, which ones did you kind of see that were like the most important to focus on, right? Just kind of put the question like that, and people normally answer that for you. Um, the other thing is, I see a lot of people, well, at least in the past, maybe not so much recently, but in the past, people pigeonhole themselves. And what I mean by that, George, is they think that because they're in a college degree program, or that they're getting the official study materials from the certification vendor, that that's all they need to do. And
Yeah, exactly.
reality is you're going to have to use other resources, because I mean, if you're working out there and doing something in the industry, like, nobody knows everything, right? So you're going to Google something, you're going to text your buddy that works at the other company and say, hey, how do you do this again? I mean, you're going to reach out to those resources that you have available to you. And you're not just going to use one thing and say, oh, this is the holy thing right here, and this is the only way it's done. So do the same thing with your cert exam prep. You need to use multiple sources, because you might learn just one thing in that other book or that other course that actually helps you pass the exam. That might be the difference between passing and failing the exam.
Good advice, Ken. And going back to your point about the knowing what certifications to start with, like you said, and I kind of try to lead people towards Security Plus, because it's like I've seen people try to go for the higher certifications coming in the door, like a CISSP, or like you say, a
Yes.
OSCP. Like, it's like, okay. Sometimes I've seen that work out. These are some super talented people and super aggressive, but that's really not the best way to approach that. It's like building a house. I mean, if you build a house and you start with the siding and the roof, and you didn't start with the concrete, the base at the bottom, you're not building a good foundation. And
Mhm.
I think that's what a lot of people coming in the industry got to understand. It's like, you got to get those fundamental concepts and kind of build. You'll get there, but you have to start with those fundamental um, concepts. And I think the CEH, I call it the Security Plus of pen testing, because it gives you
Yeah,
that
yeah.
fundamental level of that red team side. But I actually think it's a good overall um, certification, far as like coming into the industry. So I kind of recommend CEH. I recommend Security Plus. But that's definitely good advice that you gave on kind of, as you study, like you say, you make a plan, you break it down where it's not overwhelming. And like you said, if you have a family, you got to be respectful of your family if you want to have a happy home life. So kind of break it
Yeah.
down. Yeah. Kind of break it down and structure it. And like you said, we never learn everything. It's like you always Googling something. You use your coworkers. Like you said, you use friends in the industry that you may text them and ask them a question. Like, you have to use your resources. And also with the studying, like you said, using multiple resources. I mean, if you use one resource and you go into an exam like that, that's kind of setting yourself up for failure. Like, if you use
Absolutely.
multiple resources, you can kind of compare. Ken, on that note, so I want to talk about Cybery's mission. I've used
Okay.
Cybery since 2015, and I know you're very big on the Cyber side. Can you explain Cyber's mission these days when it comes to certifications and kind of training up professionals?
Yeah, so kind of the overarching goal of Cybery is to close the skills gap and the employment gap, right? And you strive for that, and nothing will ever be 100%, right? But since there's so many jobs being advertised as being available, and so many people, I mean, I get hundreds of people a week that reach out via like LinkedIn saying, "Hey, I'm trying to find my first job," right? And obviously, if there's so many openings and we got so many people looking for jobs, why aren't they meshing up, right? So that's kind of Cybery's overarching thing is to empower people to get the skills that they need to actually go get these jobs. There's a term that's been around for a few years now called security enablement. So basically, essentially baking security into any part of the organization. So let's say I work in accounting, I need to actually understand, it's not just a segmented thing like, okay, that's the security team, that's the IT team, that's the accounting team. If I'm an accountant, I need to understand how security bakes into what I do in my day to day because I'm probably the person that's going to click that phishing email and it's not going to be George, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just reality. So if the user base, and I've seen this actually when I worked in healthcare as a practitioner, when I educated the nursing staff and like showed them like how that impacted them if they clicked on an email and there was ransomware or they left their computer unlocked or they let people see the patient information, like when I talked through the scenarios of like how that actually applied to them, all of a sudden the security practices changed, right? People were very paranoid about clicking emails. And in fact, when a new CEO came on board and sent like a welcome email, everyone sent it to me like, oh my God, is this a hacker? Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
so it's
That's
just,
typical.
we just have to bake that in across the organization. So that's kind of the primary focus of cyber is number one, closing the skills gap. And number two, baking security across every part of the organization. Now that's all done with the on-demand education, right? So I can learn anytime, I can do hands-on labs anytime. And we're seeing that right now with the coronavirus stuff going on, that's actually what people need, right? Nobody's showing up in person to a class anymore because you can't, right? Most
Oh yeah.
people have
Yeah.
bans around the country and stuff or around the world, so they can't actually go out except for essentials. And so with that being said, that cyber has been one of the leaders in that space, especially in the on-demand space for a number of years. You mentioned way back in 2015. I found them in 2017, I think it was. I was in my graduate program um,
Gotcha.
and,
Okay.
and, stu- and, and studying for the CEH, right? And someone mentioned cyber. I'm like, oh, what's that? So I went and checked it out. And sort of just kind of backing up a little bit, sort of how I got involved with them is once I finished my master's, I wanted to give back, and so I applied to be an instructor there. It took several months to hear back, and I didn't really. They were going through some transition or whatever. I just thought I was like, oh, I guess I'm not, as cool as George or something, right? So eventually, they invited me to create a course, and of course, the rest is history, right? So that's kind of the overall focus of Cybery is, like I said, number one, closing the skills gap, and then number two, security enablement to empower the organization to have security baked in across the board. Now, something else that they may try to eventually work on is also trying to help like close the connection for jobs, right? So for example, there's all these jobs out there, there's all these people that want the jobs, so why not, kind of figure out how to close that as well. So that might be something as well coming down the line in the future with cyber that might be a focus as well. So just kind of speculating there, not sure 100% on something like that, but it just kind of makes sense that might be a thing they do as well.
Okay. Ken, I think it's a lot of us out there that are really glad that you found Cyber and they actually sent the email back to get you on board.
Yeah,
This is kind of a selfish question.
sure.
Talk a little bit, and I've been curious about this certification, and I'm back and forth on whether to kind of dive into it. Can you talk about the CHFI and like possible benefits where it could benefit you in your cybersecurity career?
Sure. So the CHFI, for those out there that don't know, it's the Computer Hacking Forensic Investigator exam from EC Council. So basically, for forensic investigators, um, I don't. And actually, it's funny you asked that, George, because I actually had someone like yesterday reach out to me. They were planning to study and take that, but they had an option to swap it out for something else like CCNA.
Okay.
And for those out there that don't know that, that's a Cisco Certified Network Associate. So my perspective on CHFI, the only reason I did it was because it was required for my master's program. Most of the
Gotcha.
forensic
Yep. Makes sense.
investigators I know, most of the forensic investigators I know, most of the differ people I know don't have that cert and they don't go for it. I think I think the cert's beneficial in the aspect of it kind of gives you a very, 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 and I said that 3 times for a reason,
Oh yeah.
very high level overview of forensics. Kind of touches on a lot of different things. There's a lot of content that you have to study for that exam. And the only, sort of the issue I would have with it, I guess, is number one, I don't actually see the ROI, in the industry of getting
Yeah.
that, unless your employer requires it or something. Um, and I also, it doesn't dive deep enough into the sort of the hands-on of forensics, which is the critical part, right? It's really a theory type of exam. So unless you, this is just my opinion, but unless you have it required for your degree, have it required from an employer, or you have the finances available that you just are kind of like, I want to collect another cert, I don't recommend that particular certification, right? Because you honestly could just
Gotcha.
buy some books on forensics and learn more um, than you
Gotcha. Yep.
would taking that exam. So that's kind of my personal opinion on it, my perspective on it. Um, the reason I created content on it after I passed that certification is because at that time in the Western Governors Master's program, which is the program I went in, most people were failing that exam. They were on their third or fourth attempt, and that really meant that they couldn't graduate. And so myself and another gentleman, Rob Rout, sort of collaborated a little bit. And Rob had some notes. I had some notes. We kind of put them together. And initially, I created like a practice exam for people to use. And with those notes, with those practice tests, people were able to go literally within like 30 days. These people that were failing all the time on the exam, and I failed it the first time, right? So did
Yes.
Rob, I think. And so all these people were failing and not basically preventing them from graduating with their degree. And so within like 30 days, that changed around almost completely. There were still some people that failed like the first time, but most people were passing the first time. And then when I came on board with Cybery, I created it's called Computer Hacking and Forensics, but basically it will cover a good amount of the stuff you might need to know for the CHFI exam. So if you're looking on the Cybery site and you're looking for CHFI prep, you won't probably find, I don't think you'll find it with the keyword search, but just look for forensics and it's called computer hacking forensics. And that will actually help you prep for the CHFI. But that was kind of the reason why I created content around it, was only to help those people that were failing the exam the first time. Cause I was there, right? I was that guy that failed it by, I think I failed it by like 1 or 2 questions the first time, cause I changed a bunch of answers. And so I knew
Yeah.
I knew what it felt like, to fail. And so I wanted to make sure that that changed for everyone else. So just kind of summarizing all that, I don't recommend the exam in my personal opinion unless you have it required for a degree or your employer requires it, or you just want to spend some money. Um, there's other way. There's lower cost ways to do that, and then just kind of summarizing one point that I just sort of alluded to there. That's another helpful tip for certification exams. Don't change your answers unless you're 100% certain that the answer you chose the first time is wrong.
Yeah. I caught that
So
when you said it. I was like, ooh, yeah.
yeah. So I did that with the CHFI, and the second time I took it, I was like, if I can't argue with myself enough to say this is actually wrong, then I'm just going to leave it alone. And then I passed it the second time without any problem. So that's another tip
Nice,
out.
nice. Oh yeah. Ken, I want to take this time to give you a huge shout out for what you do on
Sure.
the LinkedIn community and the surrounding Houston community. And what I want to say about that is, um, I I just feel that, I mean, if you look at your background and what you do now, you're a huge success. But what I like is that you're very humble and you always help people. You kind of connect people on LinkedIn. You're always a positive light when it comes to the community. You're always helping people in the community. I've seen some of your posts in the Houston community as far as like meetups and doing different things. I just wanted to take this time to give you a big shout out about that.
No, definitely. Thanks. Thanks for kind of giving that shout out and feedback and stuff.
Hey,
I mean,
Ken, he seemed like he don't know
most
how to take the
people.
compliment. He's very humble.
Well, I mean, it's like this, right? Like we've all gone through challenges in life, and some of us a little more than others. I had, significant adversity growing up, and one of the things I learned is that people that truly are sort of, I guess, the definition of successful, because I was fortunate at a younger age to encounter people that had very, very high levels of financial success. Even when I was broke and creditors calling and all this crap, and I
Yeah,
ran into these people, and they were always extremely humble. And so that's something one of the lessons I took from them. Most people would have focused on the money they had or something, but for me, it was like, okay, well, this person has, essentially what I strive to be. What's like, what do they have? And I think when you go through, I've got a friend, Mark Davenport, and he always talks a lot about how Mr. Adversity is his friend, right? Because when you go through adversity, it just makes you stronger, makes you understand things at a bigger level. Where if you're kind of if you never really face adversity, you just think the world essentially is this lovely cloud of fluffy place or whatever, right? With
yeah,
sprinkles on the ice cream and all that. But it's not, right? When you've gone through some adversity, you realize like, okay, well, I've got an opportunity here to really impact lives. And so I'll just kind of touch on a little bit some of the feedback I've gotten over the years, George, if I may. So
go ahead. Yeah.
with like the online courses, and this is pre-cyber. I've had a lot from cyber as well, but pre-cyber, some of the feedback. I had a health course years ago I put up. It was actually one of my first courses I ever put online. It was terrible, man. um, but and people were not hesitant to let me know in the feedback and stuff. Now, I was literally at the point of I was just so frustrated with all the negative feedback, right? Because I don't normally want to I don't hang around negative people. I just immediately when someone's negative, I just kind of
Exactly.
cut them out, right? You just have
Yep.
to. Um, and so I was literally at the point of taking this course down, and I logged in to take it down, and I had a message from a student, and the student shared a story with me, and I won't say his name, but he was outside the U.S. and basically he had a liver transplant, and the doctor said basically with the new liver, he was like rejected and stuff, and so they were like, "You got about six
Oh
months to
wow.
live, and you're going to be dead, right? It's probably less than 6 months, and you're gonna be dead." And so this man chose in the hospital. He's like, "I'm going to live, right? I want to see my kid graduate high school," and so
Exactly.
he was searching the internet. There's just so much health information out there, and so he was getting frustrated. And then he did like one more search, happened to find my course on this other platform and took it. And then it was just a basic course, man. It was vitamins, minerals, amino acids, it's what's food
Yeah.
you could eat, that sort of stuff. Just common sense to me, but for some people, they don't understand that stuff. And so he went and he applied like the dietary things and stuff I had said to change. And so he reached out 6 months later, right? Because that's when he was supposed to be dead, right? And so he reached out, sent me that
Oh.
message. Just he said, "Look, man, I was able to just see my son walk across stage for his graduation. So I just want to reach out and say thank you." So I left that course up, obviously, right? I'm like, take
Oh
it down,
man. Wow. Yeah.
because at that point, right, that kind of tells you like somebody's watching it. You don't always know the people, and this kind of go to what you said about, hey, you're helping people and stuff. You don't always see the impact you're having, but you are having an impact on people's lives. And you're probably gonna, when you hear the feedback, excuse me, you're probably only going to get like 0.1% of people giving you that feedback, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot
Yep.
of people impacted. So just when you get the haters out there, just keep going because honestly, the trolls on the internet don't pay your bills, right? The
Exactly.
people
Yeah.
that you're helping do. And so just keep doing what you're doing. That's kind of the whole message from all that. Besides, I was trying to make George cry for everybody, but it didn't
Hold on. Let me get myself together. But hey, Ken. Wow. That's that story too. That's like you said. You never know. Like, and I think we all go through that when you're trying to do something good and you have some self doubt about what you're doing. Like you said, to actually hear somebody come back and say that, and you was like, you literally saved someone's life. So it's wow.
Exactly. It's kind of that reality check, right? Like you're so focused on yourself, right? Like I was so focused on myself, like, oh, these people are being mean, boohoo, or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, let me take this down, and then out of nowhere, here comes this message to say, no, you need to keep going. Because honestly, George, if I had quit building online courses at that time of my life, I never would have moved into creating courses in the industry, in the infosec industry, and just imagine how many people wouldn't have been helped
Well,
because
yeah.
I became selfish, right? So being humble, it's really just more about understanding that it's not about you. There's a bigger purpose that you have, right? I talk a lot in the Houston community about your purpose, and I think that a lot of times we get in our own way where we think we get so much in our head of like, oh, I can't do this. Oh, the boss is being mean, or I'm dealing with. We'll just use the gym as an example, right? Because I mean, I deal with weirdos at the gym, right? People stare at me all the time, which is why I have a home gym, right? Because I'm like, sometimes you don't feel like that stuff, right? You're
Yeah.
like, come on, man, I'm just trying to work out, you weirdo. You know those ones probably, like they walk around trying to talk to everybody, and I always feel sorry. I get so many stories from women in the industry that just want to work out, right? But these creepy dudes are coming around and bothering them and stuff at the gym. I'm like, you wouldn't have that problem if you work out with me because I'm confrontational. So I call people out on their stuff, right? And part of that, that's the military background, right? Like,
Oh yeah, definitely. We're
it is what it is.
protectors.
Yeah, it is what it is. If you want to be creepy, I'll call you out, and then you'll go away. Most of them go away when you start like, why are you staring at me? Right.
Oh yeah.
Anyways, I digress. But we a lot of times we let those things be barriers to us doing stuff, right? So like right now I'm training for a bodybuilding competition in November. And of course,
Nice,
I mean,
nice.
we know that COVID-19 is going on, right? And this is my first bodybuilding competition. And yeah, man, I could be eating the Oreos, right?
Yeah.
But if Tania Wilson or Darren Jones listens to this, I'm not eating Oreos, guys. Don't worry. um, but I could be letting whatever circumstances stop me from that goal, right? But
Oh yeah.
I don't, because you have to understand that's a bigger purpose. Because to be honest, George, I'm an extremely busy guy. Like my wife probably gets me an hour a day, honestly, like maybe 2 hours. That's as much time as she gets with me, unless we budget something in, because I'm
Yeah.
doing all this other stuff, right? I'm helping all these other people, and so with that being said, totally forgot where I was going with that, but that was going to be something good, man. I literally just forgot where I was going with that. Um, that
But you
being
say
said,
you're working
yeah,
all the time.
yeah. So I think where I was going with that is there's a lot of ways we can make excuses, right? I could be like, I'm working so much, I can't do the workouts. I can't, I can't train for this thing. I can't, oh, these people over here are bothering me. Oh, this person said I suck or whatever. But the reality is there's a bigger impact that you're having as part of your purpose, or, as we might call it, our destiny. And so you just have to sort of stay laser focused. And I, for people in the industry, I would explain it this way. It's a VPN, right? Like you need to form a VPN around yourself and put all that encryption around yourself. And so that way you stay laser focused. So all those haters, they can't really get in, right? So when you focus it like that and you pretend that you got a VPN connection to your destiny, then those
Yeah.
people can never really steer you off course. If that makes
Oh,
sense.
that's a nice analogy.
I just had to
Very
throw it
nice
in there,
analogy.
just based off the audience. I just had to throw it in there, right?
Ken, and you talk about growing up in adversity. I did as well, coming from few opportunities, and I went to the military, and the military kind of did a lot of great things for me. It built confidence for me. It provided financial stability.
Yep.
But my show was based on getting into the cybersecurity world. It's a lucrative industry. It's about giving back as well, but it's a lucrative industry.
Mhm.
And I stress the importance of building your brand. Everybody might not feel that way, but I stress the importance of building your brand and being able to pursue business ventures that make sense to you. Um, how do you feel about that, as far as developing a business mentality and building prosperity
Yep.
in the cybersecurity industry?
100% for that. If you think that you don't need to build your own at least secondary income stream at a minimum, you're mistaken, because a lot of people get laid off, etc. And many people in America are like $400 away from poverty, right? They don't
Yeah.
they live paycheck to paycheck. They're trying to show off their new boat to the neighbors, and so I think it's fiscally responsible for anyone in the industry to have a business mindset. Now, that doesn't mean you have to start your own business, but you need to basically take what's yours, right? You need to have that more aggressive mindset. So, in the military, in the special operations community, the we kind of quote unquote the bad guys out there, bad guys and gals, because there's criminals that are bad people in the world that are female as well, but they're the wolves, right? And there's the sheepdog, right? And the sheepdog's aggressive and stuff like the wolf, but they've got a measure of good to them because they're doing it for a good purpose, right? And
Oh
so
yeah.
you need to have that sheepdog mentality for anything you're doing in the industry as far as your job and stuff. So let's say, for example, George said, try to negotiate a salary and I want to get 200K a year base, but it's just not in their budget to do that. And say, what I say is I say, okay, let's talk about stock then instead, right? Or let's talk about an extra week of vacation a year. So just because you're told no in a negotiation and an interview on salary doesn't mean that you can't try to throw something else in there. Because a lot of times, especially if it's a smaller company, they'll work with you on maybe some extra vacation time, or you can work from home on Fridays. Or, I mean, right now we're all working from home, but you work from home on Fridays and stuff. You just have to go in with that mentality of like, I deserve this. This is mine,
Oh yeah.
right? And kind of talking about the actual business side of things. So I think that every single person in the industry, even if you're trying to get into the industry because you're still learning things, I think every single person in the industry needs to monetize their knowledge. So whether that's a podcast and you set it up to like, you put your podcast through Red Circle where you can take tips and stuff from people and they can tip you if they like you or whatever, or you set it up on YouTube where they can do the Patreon and, or you create online courses or you sell a book or like, there's just some way you need to monetize your knowledge because number one, there's someone out there that can only learn from you. And if you're not getting your knowledge out there and you're not speaking to them, then they're never going to learn it. Right. And
Exactly.
and
Yep.
and I had to learn that, right? I like there's some people that are like, I couldn't never learn this thing until I took your course, right? And so we all have that. We all have that gift internally, and there's someone out there waiting for us to actually share that gift with them. But I think when you start creating your own revenue streams, and I always say put them on, like create them online, so it's relatively passive, right? There's nothing 100% passive because you have to work at it, right? But relatively passive income streams, like selling a book or whatever, you still have to do marketing stuff to sell a book. So that's why I say it's not a passive income stream. But putting that stuff online allows you to make money while you sleep. I'll never forget, George, the first time I had an online course that actually sold. It was only like $16 is all I made, but
Yeah.
we were out at dinner and I'd seen that when we got back, I was like, oh shoot, that was my first sale. I was
Yeah.
like, this is nice, right? And I was
Oh yeah.
hooked. So it's not that you're being selfish, right? So like if you're out there and you're like, well, that's kind of selfish. I don't want to charge money for stuff. No. Y- Number one, people don't finish stuff if it's free for the most part. If you charge people, then they'll take it seriously and they'll finish it.
Exactly. Yep.
So let's just, for example, you go like into a mall. I haven't been to a mall in years, so I might date myself, but you go into the mall and like you go by the little like Chinese restaurant or whatever, and they're offering free samples. How many times have you ate that free sample and actually bought from them?
Mm.
Right? Like nobody really does.
Yeah.
Excuse me. But if you go to like a nice steakhouse and you're paying like $100 for that plate of food, like pretty much everyone's going to eat all that steak and the potatoes.
Oh yeah.
and
You're gonna
whatever.
get the best out of that plate, right?
Exactly, right? Same thing, so there's nothing wrong with charging people. People are used to that. People are willing to spend money. There's always a buyer and a seller. Like right now, right? If you had toilet paper and you sold it, you'd be making some money, right? But there's always a buyer and seller in every single market. So you have to get over that fact of it. Because I was this way when I first started. I want to give everything for free. You have to get over that aspect of it. You need to understand that you're doing this for a few reasons, right? You're charging people because number one, it's going to benefit them because they're going to take it more serious and they're actually going to finish it. And then it's going to have a real impact on their lives. And number two, you're being fiscally responsible for yourself and your family or your loved ones because broke people can't help anyone, right? I mean, that's just reality. You cannot help it. I was broke. I'm telling you, you can't really help anybody when you're broke. But when you have
Oh
money,
yeah.
you can step in, right? So like as an example with what's going on, because we have money, we were able to buy groceries for people, right? That didn't have the money for their own groceries,
Nice.
right?
Nice.
Couldn't do that when I was broke. I would have been the
Yeah.
person like begging for food, right? So that's just it's just stupid for someone to think that you don't need money, you don't need to be fiscally responsible to be able to have an impact. That's just dumb. Anyone that tells you that is a moron, and they're just trying to get you to buy their book or their course or whatever, right? It's just honestly, right? And that's what I had actually just kind of sidebarred real quick with all this stuff going on with coronavirus. I did a post, I think a week or two ago, because I just got so tired, man. Like people were posting an old person in the toilet paper aisle with a sad look on their face, and then they were like, for a limited time, my course, my coaching program.
No,
I'm like, come
no.
on. Like I called
Come
them
on.
out, like, come on now. What are you actually doing, right? Like this is what we're doing. We're getting groceries. We're helping out in the community in our local area. What are you doing, right? And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. Real impact.
yeah, no, exactly, right. And so part of all that, right, is to say all that is that you need to be fiscally responsible. And because honestly, George, you're a better practitioner when you don't have to worry about money all the time. This is just real talk, right? It is,
Preach.
and it's not just for preaching. It's not just the infosec industry, right? Or cybersecurity, because people like that term, I guess, nowadays. But so it's just not the infosec
That's the cool
industry.
word.
Yeah, no, right. We're cool kids if we say cybersecurity. um, I don't know. Who knows? But it's not just this industry, though, right? Like any industry, even back when I worked as a nurse, the nurses that were fiscally responsible were better practitioners because they didn't have to stress about money all the time. That's just the
Oh, yeah.
reality of it, right? When you could set yourself up to not have to worry about money all the time, I'll tell you what, George, one of the best feelings ever is when you forget when payday is. And you're like, oh shoot, I
That's a
just
great,
I
yeah.
just got some money coming in. That's great. That's where you want. That's what you want to strive for. Where you set yourself up financially, and you don't have to make $1 million to do it. Some people think that you have to make millions to do all this. I know people, George, that have a good amount of stocks and everything, and a good portfolio, and they make 30
Yeah.
grand a year, right? And they're
Yep.
not in this industry, right? They're just working kind of a menial office job, so to speak.
Yeah.
And not dissing them with that, but just because it's kind of like a regular pushing papers type of job. But they were fiscally responsible. Yes, it takes sacrifice, but honestly, if you want long-term wealth is what we call it, right? Because there's a lot of rich people, but they're literally in debt. They're living paycheck to paycheck. But yeah, they make, six figures or multi six figures, but they're broke all the time.
Yeah.
But if you want real wealth, you're going to have to learn that you need to sacrifice to some extent today for a better tomorrow. So like for example, I'll just give some real life examples here. I used to eat out like all the time. Like before Chipotle had all the scandals, like I was a diehard Chipotle fan.
Oh,
Before
yeah.
they were
Yep.
killing people with tomatoes and stuff. So but that costs money, right? You're eating all the time, stuff like that. So I started making my own stuff. Um, and so it's just little things like that, right? Like I have a addiction to books, and so I buy a lot of books. I don't like audiobooks a lot, so I buy a lot. I've got and as I'm saying this, George, I'm looking at my
I'm
shelf.
the
I'm like, I've
opposite.
got, yeah. I'm like, I got a lot of books here. I need to get rid of some again. But that's kind of my vice, right? So I have certain vices, and I know that like no matter what, I'm still going to buy a freaking book, right? So I figure out where can I sacrifice things, right? And that's
Yeah.
what you need to do if you're listening to this and you're like, well, my finances aren't the best right now. That's cool. We all start someplace. So there's a couple of things that I would put out there for your audience is like basic things, um, and do these things because you're going to recognize that once you do them and you continuously do them, your finances will get better. It's like a weird shift, right? So number
Gotcha.
one thing is you've heard it before, save 10%. Now, when I first started out, like there's just no way I could actually afford to save 10%. So what I recommend people do is take a certain amount that you can do out of each paycheck. So maybe that's $20. And then what you want to do is take that $20 in ones, and you're going to take 10% of that, right? Which is $2, and just put that in a special jar or, a special box or whatever, right? Just set it
Okay.
someplace special. And so every single paycheck, you're sending $2 in that spot because that's 10% of that 20, right? After you've done that a few times, try to raise that number you're taking out of your check to maybe like $30, right? So now you're sending away $3. And just kind of as you go through, and again, this allows you to still pay your bills and all that stuff, right? But you're
Oh,
getting in
yeah.
the habit of saving that money. at some point you eventually want to get into that 10% of your gross income, just because that actually works in the ether energy a little better. But
Yeah.
it's starting off, do what you can, and once you build that habit, then grow on that habit. The other thing is kind of what I mentioned with the books and stuff. I knew there were certain things that I was set in stone that I wasn't giving up, and so that's what you also need to figure out is like, what are the things that you really, really enjoy? Like I enjoy reading, so that's why I buy a lot of books. So what are the things you really enjoy? And then what are the things that you could give up? Like if you had a choice between paying rent and doing this thing, like what couldn't you give up? And obviously I wouldn't like buy a book if I had to, pay my mortgage or something, but you get
Yes.
the
Yeah.
idea. Like what is something that you can give up? And those are the things you can give up. So for most people, it's eating out, right? Like maybe you can buy a book or watch some videos on YouTube on how to make some fast recipes and plan out your meals. So maybe you take every Sunday and plan your meals for the week or something. So just little things like that. Like eating out is actually one of the biggest things Americans spend their money on. And so
Yeah.
that if you cut that out, you're actually going to notice you're probably going to have at least a few $100 a month, um, coming back in. So with all that being said, though, George, when you make a shift anywhere in your life, whether it's learning new things, shifting your finances, etc., when you're trying to do that, you're going to have people in your life you're going to have to cut out, or that are going to be haters on you. So, for example, many years ago, when I stopped partying and I gave up drinking, um, I had a lot of people that, were, oh, we're best friends or whatever. And then like, it was kind of like the friendship's over,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Because
Kind
it's
of
like,
fade
oh,
away.
you're not, yeah, exactly. Right. You're not hanging with us no more. Oh, and you just have to learn like, okay, well, that's great. But like, I want to do this life now. Right. So there's going to be people you have to cut out. It might be people close to you. So just be prepared for that. If you're one of those people that has a tough time cutting people out, like I'll just say with George from the military, that made it a lot easier to kind of flip the switch, so to speak, and quickly cut people out and not care about it.
Yeah.
Just because you deal with some things, you deal with loss of life, and you
Yeah.
learn that okay, well, I can't change what happened, so obviously this person is gone because they're dead, and so you kind of get that skill set there, so to speak. So for
Yeah.
those
Kind
out
of
there
like a
that don't
coping
have it,
mechanism.
no, exactly. Yeah, yeah. You just kind of learn, like, all right, well, I can't change what happened. I have to move on, and so similar thing here. Hopefully those people that you're cutting out don't die, but still have to cut those people out because you're going to notice you're going to get a lot of people that
Oh yeah.
will be different once you try to change your life, and part of that's jealousy, right? They're jealous that you're able to make that shift to get your finances better, right? Or
Yeah.
that you're learning new things, you're changing jobs, whatever the case might be. So just for your audience out there, be prepared that you're going to get some haters when you make a shift like that.
Great advice, Ken. And we're a lot alike in those ways, like taking out negative people, negative energy, making sacrifices. Like I have a lot of physical books myself, and I actually love the audio books, like listening to them on the way to work. Like you
Mhm.
said, I'll sacrifice some things that I like to splurge on for an educational book because in my mind, the knowledge is an investment. I'm
Yep.
seeing the future of where that could get me. Like instead of buying a CD, I'm buying that audio book that's going to increase my knowledge and increase my wealth. Ken, absolutely thank you for being on the show today. You actually that was that was perfect. The cybersecurity side, you definitely gave us a lot of knowledge on the business side and the just the total portfolio of getting to where you need to be, the long term game. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So,
Yep.
Ken, can you give us some your social media on where to reach you?
I thought you were asking for my social. I was like, oh, look at George getting me. Nice try
I
with
was about
social
to get you.
engineering.
Yeah,
So
I was going to
I'm,
switch it on you.
yeah. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to get your social for
Yeah,
Gregoria.
yeah,
So isn't it 000000000? Is that? Okay.
yeah. That's it. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Um, so social media, I'm more active on LinkedIn. So just search for Ken Underhill, and I've got CHFI in my title, so you'll find me. Normally, if you search for Ken Underhill, that'll pull up. Or if you're connected to George, just look in his connection list and you should find me. I do have a Twitter. It's Cyber Ken, I think, is the handle. I'm not as active on Twitter. I recently got it because people just kept pestering me for years, for several years now.
Where's your Twitter?
Yeah. Yeah, so I finally,
Gotcha.
exactly. So I finally got one, and that's really the social media. I don't get, I'm not on TikTok, or I'm not on Instagram. I'm not. For me, I like LinkedIn is convenient for me, and that's why I use it. Twitter, it's okay, but that's why I'm not really on it a whole lot. Other social media, I don't need to upload pictures of me working out at the gym, right? Like I've got a private page that I have that for people that want to track my bodybuilding journey. That's I've given them access to that or whatever. So like some social media, like for me, if my, because I have my own businesses, and so if my customers aren't on that social media, I basically don't use it, right? Like why would I waste my time on there to do that stuff? So most of my people are on LinkedIn. So that's kind of where I'm at. So short story there is I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Twitter a little bit.
Gotcha. Hey, Ken, I thank you for being on the show today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I just want to touch real quick. George mentioned a CD for those like millennials out there that don't know what that is. We used to have to like put this physical disc in our car to listen to stuff. Do you remember?
Oh wow, I forget about stuff like that.
Yeah, no, right. Everyone's like my iPhone. So I just want to explain that for those out there. You'll see them in museums, and so that's what that is. You remember?
Good call out, kid.
You remember the tapes too? Remember you had to rewind it,
Oh yeah, I remember all that. Remember 8 tracks? Oh, good.
You just
they definitely don't know that one. I did.
Cool, man. Yeah, like I really appreciate you having me on, man. Had a blast. Happy to come on anytime.
All right, thank you, Ken.
Thanks, man.